smile, please. Thank you so much. So kind of just to go through the format once more, it's basic introduction followed by every speaker having a 10-minute conversation. I'll try to ask some questions which derive some actionable insights, hopefully out of this conversation for the people who are watching. After 10 minutes each for every speaker, the order, as Ishani said, is Mayank, Pulkit, Rahul, Shreya, then Arup, and finally Irwan. So once we are done with the 10-minute slot for each speaker, then we'll start entertaining the audience questions. The audience questions will be mostly spoken by the audience members themselves. So I'll give them the permission to unmute, and they'll be asking their own questions after a raise of hands. And maybe at the end, we'll read out 1 or 2 questions from the chat. And after that happens, we'll break out in different rooms for networking. And the breakout rooms will be chosen by the participants on the basis of a Google form released by Ishani after the question answer session happens. So I hope all the participants have joined in. And to everyone, first of all, I want to welcome you all to the Yatri story, Delhi NCR, by the Yatris of obviously Delhi NCR. And thank you so much for joining in. Today is a holiday, and I hope you're enjoying your holiday. And I hope your holiday will be much more enlightened and brighter by the end of the session. So I want to wish you all a happy Independence Day to start with. I hope today we learn about the journey of 6 amazing speakers who are with us on how they are impacting independent India. So you can see the speaker list on the screen right now, hopefully. If you can't, just let us know in the chat. So we have 6 speakers with us. So guys, thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you so much for giving your time to us.
Thanks, Aditya.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. So it would be a pleasure to talk to you all, and I'm pretty sure we'll all get to learn something today, which will enrich our lives in some manner. So as I said, the interview starts right now, and our first speaker for the day is Mayank Jain, who's the co-founder of Sumarth. So Mayank Jain, guys, is the co-founder of Sumarth, whose focus area is bridging India Bharat Connect, rejuvenating the relationship with nature. And the tagline goes, Desh ka culture, agriculture, which I think is very true. A serial social entrepreneur working in the domain of agriculture, agri-tech, and engineering, Mayank Jain is the co-founder of the social enterprise Sumarth, a not-for-profit and for-purpose, as he describes it, based out of Gaya, working with more than 10,000 farmers, and he works in ensuring sustainable agrarian livelihoods for farmers. So hi, Mayank.
Hi, Aditya. How are you? Thank you.
Doing good, doing good.
Yes. Yeah.
I think thank you for joining in, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to interact with you. I'll just put you in the spotlight now. Great. So Mayank, to start off with, agriculture and agri-tech is, like in India, a very less chosen career. People don't move to it immediately after their graduation or after their schooling. Most of people, try to move to tech or other so-called societally popular careers. So what made you take up the Desh Ka culture?
So when I come to my background, so I'm an engineer. So I'm a manufacturing processes and automation engineer. I graduated in 2012, and after that I worked for 3 years in intellectual property, in mechanical and manufacturing engineering. So I was always inspired by a show, if you know, on Doordarshan, Tarang karke ek show aata tha, and there was Arvind Gupta sir who was coming and making toys from trash. So he has a very famous line which he always said, which you can read, and somewhere there are engineers helping those fly faster than sound, but where are the engineers who are actually helping those who must live on the ground? तो इसके बाद से हुआ था, तो it was something which always gave goosebumps and say, so we are engineers, but we need to explore much beyond just high-flying cars and all these things. So that's how I started my journey to explore different domains. And for me, I see agriculture as one of the domains. So still the skills remains engineering, but our domain right now in which I operate is agriculture. So that's how I landed up in agriculture.
Okay, so like all of us, you are also an engineer, but then you stepped into agriculture.
Yeah, so my domain is agriculture, otherwise I'm an engineer.
Got it. And since you mentioned Doordarshan, did you watch a lot of Krishi Darshan also?
Not very much Krishi Darshan, but definitely Tarang I watched.
Oh, got it. Because there's a joke by Kapil Sharma. I'm sorry for putting this in here, but I just remembered that he said that people who were not related to agriculture or who did not even have any insight into agriculture would watch this Krishi Darshan, and on the basis of that, they would plan families. So yeah, it was a pretty popular show for those not so much interested in agriculture also. So since you are into post-harvest management, and it is something we all grew up reading in our SST books, that how post-harvest management is not all that great in India right now. How did you create your innovations for this field? What all factors did you have in mind?
Yeah, so just to give a little bit of background, so we started in 2015, and when we started, so we started from field work because we did not have any other experience. So the first logical step which we took was doing immersion learning. So it was all learning, get job, and that's how we started. But after 1 or 2 years, what we realized initially and what was our conclusion was, everybody is trying to work on sustainable production, but nobody talks about sustainable consumption. So when we see that production and consumption are two different sides of same coin, so it becomes very important to look on things which happens beyond once the harvest is out. So you have to focus on those areas, and especially so when we talk from, so there are two multiple perspectives which come. So one is from the rural India perspective, where we are talking about production and market linkages, and then when we try to complement it by the urban scenario, because thanks to globalization, quote unquote, what has happened that food is traveling a lot of miles. So what we realize that people have lost their sense with food. So their food habit has been corrupted, and we have to venture out into value-added agriculture for the same, so that we could work on this particular thing, and that's how we decided that we should focus upon post-harvest management and value-added agriculture, and that's we think is the way ahead to go from this thing.
Got it. And when did you start Sumarth?
So Samarth was started in 2015. Our field work started in 2015. Yeah.
Got it. And since then, what has been the line of progress of the venture?
Yeah. So initially, so what we focused upon was that we wanted to provide 360-degree support to farmers, right? From seed input linkages to market linkages, to have dignified life and have a sustainable recurring income from agriculture. And in that, we started with different programs, and we run more than 8 programs right now on fields. But what I would like to mention that I talked about here also is that what we figured out is that just focusing alone on sustainable production will not help. So we need to have a full focus on sustainable consumption also. And so we are right now running 8 different programs, and one which specifically caters to urban areas also, or peri-urban areas, is our project by the name itself called Desh Ka Culture Agriculture, where we promote people growing their own food. So it's a kind of a grow your own food movement, where what we say that if you want to have a good harvest, you have to at least sow a seed. And once you sow that seed, you empathize with the entire farming cycle during when you get engaged with it, and it helps you in rejuvenation and getting a connection relationship right with nature, with yourself, specifically in terms of urban areas. Right now, digital gratification is happening. So what we say that everybody is becoming addicted to smartphones or the gadgets. So it becomes very much important to have these things. And so Desh Ka Culture Agriculture, particularly our project, it focuses upon grow your own food movement. And we are working in Delhi, Patna and Gaya for this project. And we started this project in 2016. And since then, we have worked with more than 125 households and around 5 schools and around 2-3 institutions, not-for-profit institutions. We have collaborated with them, and we have worked with right from class 1 students till class 10 students in different domains. We have conducted workshops for them, and so right now it has covered more than around I would say 7,500 square feet of virtual rooftops. So, but the virtual farmland, 7,500 square feet, and we have been able to harvest around 10,000 kgs of fresh and
Wow.
chemical-free vegetables. So that is the thing right now.
Amazing. So, when you have such large scale impact, and like I would also want to talk about like the two programs that you mentioned. So one is the capacity building of farmers in rural areas, and one is the, urban area program, which you have built where people are doing their own agriculture. So let's start with the urban area, program. So when you started rolling it out, obviously, people face certain lack of time. So how do you suggest they manage their time? So let's say, people who are watching this currently or people who will watch the recorded version, if people want to join in this movement, how do they manage time apart from their job, apart from their, daily pursuits to do this?
So one thing what I have realized while being engaged with agriculture is that agriculture is a kind of I would say it's a part of life if you go by that way, and it's not necessarily so it's just like business that you have not to be मतलब हर समय आपको engage रहने की ज़रूरत नहीं होती इतना ज़्यादा. There are certain time frames where you have to be disciplined, punctual, and do your regular rituals at regular time. So if you are able to have that kind of discipline in your life or that kind of patience, so anybody can incorporate, I think, agriculture into their regular lifestyle. So that's what I have seen, and particularly, especially in this COVID time, what we have realized that there are a lot of people because everybody is sitting at home right now and people are going mad that they don't have anything to do and with every movement and everything restricted, particularly in my friend circle, if I talk about and what I have seen in past 3 to 4 months. So people are right now appreciating the slowness of everything which is around us. So they are trying to appreciate the nature, the bird's voice in the morning, which was always there, but they did not find time to notice. So I think just having a little bit of change in sedentary lifestyle right now and being a little bit more disciplined can be a start to this movement. And you have to sow a seed, so maybe a spinach or a tomato. You can just start with that, and I think it will be a really fruitful journey down the line.
Absolutely. I think, guys, whoever is watching this, so, this is an amazing skill to learn also while this COVID time is going on, because we are at home. Thankfully, we have saved up on travel time. So if we can invest it here, it would be a great new experience for all of us. So the way we have so many Instagram pictures with people becoming master chefs, maybe we can have so many Instagram pictures also with people becoming some amazing farmers and promoting this trade.
It's called Green Thumb Expert right now in Urban Lingo.
What is it called? Can you please repeat again?
Green Thumb Expert.
Green Thumb Expert, great.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have a new, bit of jargon also, or, lingo also to attach to it. So Green Thumb Expert, great.
Yeah.
So Mayank also wanted to ask you, what have been the challenges in capacity building in the rural sector?
So in rural sector, when we talk about just doing capacity building of farmers, I think that the government is a major stakeholder and they already roll out a lot of training and extension programs. So one of the major challenges while running out this program is always funding, and why will people support? So what we realized in our initial 2 years, just by going ahead with services, it does not interest people that much because they don't get loyalty for the same, and neither their risk is getting mitigated. So that was the prime challenge while working with them, and that's why we focused on creating economic value for them. So whatever they are producing, if we are upskilling them or providing them some technology inputs, we are at the same time we are also mitigating their risk by providing them a guaranteed buyback for their produce. So that was the first challenge. And apart from that, the caste and demographic challenge is always there. But thankfully, it did not bother us much, particularly because I am a Jain. So I'm just saying that. So I was out of this caste system. So that gave me a fair bit of advantage, I must admit here, while working in fields. And so I was equally welcomed by the upper caste as well as the lower caste in our current caste structure. So that was another challenge. And then so our team followed me wherever we go. And so I was the first who was breaking the ice with the communities, and then they were able to build the relationship. So that's how we started. Yeah. So these were the initial challenges.
Great. So my last question to you would be, post-COVID, now that things are hopefully starting to settle down, what's your plan in the future with Samar? I'm sorry I was saying Suman in the initial times because I thought that the U is pronounced that way. So now I know.
Yeah. So Samarth, so we are having multiple things which are growing right now. So we work in honey, we work in mushrooms, we work in moringa, we work in onions. So we are moving gradually towards value-added agriculture, where we are right now into secondary processing of things. We are making mushroom powder, canned mushroom, canned baby corn, moringa leaves powder. So one is about creating a micro enterprise at rural level. That's what we are focusing upon, having their own brand, their own ownership, and also giving a good quality at just price. So that is something what we are right now focusing our energy upon. So it's about creating micro enterprises in rural areas from the field activities. Similarly, creating a farmers club in urban areas through school gardens. So these are the two things which also echo the thought of Jagriti Yatra, if we talk about, because we are at their platform also. So it's always about Udyam Janit Vikas, enterprise-led development. So that's what we are focusing upon in nature.
Great. Thank you so much, Mayank, for your time, and thank you so much for helping India to foster more agri entrepreneurs. I think more power to you, and I'm very hopeful that in the coming days you'll be able to do that in a much more powerful manner. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker would be Pulkit Garg, who is the founder of Anya Wellness and Edgy Scribblers. His focus area is service. He's a content strategist who finds bliss in natural healing. So in 2016, Pulkit Garg founded Edgy Scribblers, a content development agency providing services in the domain of content writing, script writing, SEO, and consultation on communication strategies for websites, brochures, and videos. He gradually worked his way to establish his dream startup in 2019 in the form of Anya Wellness, an abode for wellness enthusiasts across the globe. So guys, now the spotlight is on Mr. Pulkit Garg, who has helped me a lot with the organization of this whole meet also. Thank you so much, Pulkit. And
not a problem.
So guys, Pulkit is the founder of Anya Wellness and Edgy Scribblers. So I was talking people's LinkedIn profiles, before this meet so that I could research some questions upon them. And in his LinkedIn profile, Pulkit says that I have successfully failed in 4 startups. So where did you find courage to start a 5th one?
So I guess for that we have Jagriti Yatra to thank. So it was all about, before I went on Jagriti Yatra, I had tried my hands on 4 different ventures during my college days. So probably due to one or the other reason, each of them failed. So one was where I just gave it up because I was not able to find a solution to overcome an obstacle. The second one was because of a bit of finance management. Third one, somewhere had some team issues. So all those just added up to my list of learnings or different learning I had from these failures. And then Jagriti Yatra happened in the year 2014. And while listening to Joe Marriott in Gram Vikas, I could really relate to what he was mentioning out there. And he said that persistence is the key to building an amazing startup or building your enterprise. And that is what just clicked me. And that is when the rest is all history. And today I have Edgy Scribblers and Anya Wellness that's working out.
Amazing. So Pulkit, also want to know a bit more about Anya Wellness. Like how does it help, the corporate training programs and general people like us?
Sure. So I will answer it in 2 parts, because corporates and then general people, it's a two different verticals for us in Anya Wellness. So if I have to give Anya Wellness just one line, explanation to anybody. So Anya Wellness is a preventive healthcare discovery platform out there, and which is primarily aligned towards natural healing. So in Anya Wellness, Ayurveda, naturopathy, diet, yoga, these therapies are a major focus. And I was just going through a lot of things. So initially we just started off Anya Wellness for helping the general public out there and, reach very close to the nature. in my own personal experience, when I wanted to find an Ayurvedic center in Faridabad, so I stay in Faridabad Sector 8, I really could not, figure out which center to go to. Though I have been practicing it, but it became a very big struggle for me to find out. And so that is where the idea of Anya Wellness came into picture. So apart from helping people, have a easy discovery of wellness centers, we are also now launching our digital wellness programs so that you can, during these pandemic times, you can have wellness routines that are, following in your regimes that you all guys have built up for your own physical fitness. And for corporates, it's more about overcoming sedentary lifestyle. So with even pandemic coming into picture, our sitting times have increased to 10 to 12 hours, which give easy access to diseases like lower backache problems, cervical issues, and many more. The list goes on. So that is where Anya Wellness comes into the picture and helps you overcome these ailments through natural healing capacities, which really doesn't have any side effects. So even when we talk about modern therapies, if I just take hypertension as an example, you continuously keep taking pills, and with passing years, the dosage only increases. The solution is never there. You are never able to achieve that cure for it. But yes, with Ayurveda and naturopathy, there are a lot of successful case studies where the cure has been achieved. You don't have to take any further medicines. You just did a bit of lifestyle change and things were sorted for you. So that is how for both corporates as well as for general public, we are trying to help.
Right. When you were saying, I just got reminded, let me straighten my back a bit. Because I've been sitting on for too long, and I think what you mentioned, I've been facing a bit. The backache is a true story. And I'm very young, by the way. So, I'm pretty sure with the middle-aged people, it's even worse. Now, Pulkit, you said that Anya Wellness is a preventive healthcare discovery platform. Now, preventive healthcare is not very urgent if I, just think like a layman here. Like I'm just putting out my thoughts. When the disease actually strikes, that's when it becomes urgent. Now, is that a problem with the other customers that you seek as well? That is it a nice to have in their mind? And if yes, then how do you kind of, upsell this thing to them as an entrepreneur?
So see, that's a very true factor. But, so coming on to a point where at any given point of time, the human population across the globe, your 90 to 95% of the population is at the cusp of, just getting into that chronic illness space where it's an urgent need. So a major focus was why to just focus on that 5% when we have a lot of therapies out there, but nobody focuses on preventive market. So that was a major factor that we wanted to make people aware. Yes, people do understand the things, but yes, awareness is a major factor, and that is where Anya Wellness is working. It today also remains a challenge for us where, yes, people say that abhi mere ko zarurat nahi hai, so why should I take a package? So we are trying to figure out a way around that. But yes, slowly and steadily, we have seen people turning up more. So we launched our packages for the first time in June 3rd week. And till date, we have sold around 20 packages in totality. And luckily, those people have given us very positive feedback so far. So now we are coming out with a much more wider market outreach. So these 20 packages were more or less within the inner circle of our team members. And now we are expanding our horizon through in the region of Delhi NCR. And then looking forward to more reviews and feedbacks coming in from there.
During like mid-March. So what was your first thought that, did you think we do, or were you very positive about it from the word go?
Aditya, can you please repeat the question? I guess there was a bit of voice break in between.
Sure. Sorry for that. So as I was saying that when COVID struck in mid-March, so most of us entrepreneurs exclaimed that, oh no, we have lost businesses, things are getting postponed. What was your first reaction when COVID struck, and how did you plan your movement during this period?
So we were no different. To give everyone an insight, like 22nd March was the time when lockdown was announced. And I was, in a fear of that throughout the month of March, because 27th, 28th, 29th March, we were going to have our first wellness retreat that we were planning in Mumbai region. And that was our first, entry to the market. That was our very first product we were launching. And then COVID happened, and, the rest is history. We really could not do it. And I was fearful because we had invested a lot towards its marketing and creating awareness on that. We had our speakers lined up, we had our guests lined up, we had our participants also lined up. The payments were, the only thing positive was that the payments were not made, but its confirmations were there. And because of the lockdown, everything just, came crashing down. We had put up last 3 months of efforts. Since January, we were working, and we had planned the complete retreat plan forward. But yes, lockdown happened, and as a startup founder, you have to find ways to adapt. So that is where digital wellness programs came into the picture. Though it took us around 1 or 2 weeks to figure out things, but yes, then we invested 1.5 whole months and came up with the structure of digital wellness programs.
Great, and I'm sure that's working very well, right?
Yeah, that's picking up the pace now.
Amazing. So, like, where can we access these digital workout or kind of exercise sessions?
So currently, you can reach out to us on our Instagram page, and it's also available on their respective landing pages on our website. It's anyawellness.com. And for any personal query, you can feel free to message me.
So, guys, just message in the JYA group. I think Pulkit is one of the most active members there. So, Pulkit, you have also been bootstrapping both your ventures, which is Edgy Scribblers and Anya Wellness. How do you manage time, and how do you manage bootstrapping two ventures? Because it's a lot of kind of pressure on the finances as well. So how do you do that?
So see, Anya Wellness is a startup, and in true terms, it's the only venture that's been bootstrapping. So I would not say that Edgy Scribblers was being bootstrapped, but yes, it was also started from scratch. The only difference is that Anya Wellness requires certain time because of its business model to reach a stage of cash positive or revenue positiveness that we talk about. But Edgy Scribblers being more on a skill-based front, where I'm myself delivering the service to my clients, it was more of my time investment that I put in over there. And Edgy Scribblers really helped me bootstrap Anya Wellness. So it has been a journey in that particular manner. And about time management, yes, so I had to cut corners on certain other things, like missing on movies or certain different outing with friends. But yes, more or less it's now paying out and things are getting into a structure.
Yeah, missing movies and all is something that all of us entrepreneurs can relate very hard with you on. So, Pulkit, what are your future plans?
So moving forward, yes, we look forward to Anya Wellness first achieving a milestone of being, known by everybody in across the nation, and helping everybody to have their ailments cured at a level where yes, it has created an impact in their life, and then we move it to the global side. And for Edgy Scribblers, we are already focusing on the global clientele, and we have been able to serve around 10 clients from US and London, and now looking to expand the client base over there.
Great. Thank you so much, Pulkit, for your time, and all the best for all your future plans. I'm pretty sure that the digital expansion will be very fruitful for you and Anya Wellness. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Aditya. Thank you.
So now we have Rahul Maurya under the spotlight, who is the co-founder of Class Insta, focusing on EdTech, and he's digitizing the Bharat's hyperlocal coaching institute. As part of an amazing team, Rahul Maurya is the co-founder at Class Insta, an EdTech startup that focuses on digitizing the hyperlocal tuition classes with technology and making them more accountable and performance-oriented. Although he's yet to learn to drive a car, which is, I think, common to me, I am also yet to learn to drive a car, he drives growth at Class Insta. Rahul is passionate about product design, EdTech, and early stage team management. So, Rahul, what's your story behind starting Class Insta?
Hi, sir. Hi. First of all, happy Independence Day to all of you. Yeah, so story behind second year of college. I was in second year. The idea was stuck to me when I was in second year. So I started to build a small, simple system for my own coaching institute. So I didn't knew much of coding. I was a good designer, so I designed the system. Everything was up and looked so good, but it wasn't working. So I ultimately ditched the idea, and so I carried my studies. So after 2-3 years, I met my co-founder, and he had a similar kind of idea of a competitive exam preparation application where the content comes from the coaching institutes and goes to students from all across India. So we kind of did some brainstorming, and Then finally, we pitched the idea last year in August in a global entrepreneurship boot camp in Bangkok. And for God's sake, we were the third runner-up. So it was a good. So this gave us kind of a we got a lot of feedback from the jury from multiple countries. So it was a good experience. So that is how it started. That is from where we took it all. Yeah.
I think when you say coaching institutes of Bharat, there's a certain image I create in my mind. So I was also an engineering aspirant back in the day when I used to go to this coaching institute called FITCI Lakshmi Nagar. So all these FITCIs and Allens and whatever different engineering coaching institutes are there, and even the CA coaching institutes, which I see a lot in Lakshmi Nagar. The thing that I see with them is they are all extremely non-tech savvy. So very much focused on the offline education imparting through a distributional method. Now, is that a challenge while you're trying to onboard clients? Are they comfortable with the way it is going on right now?
Frankly speaking, no. It's a tedious task. I mean, the FITCI and Allen, these are still kind of massive coaching institutes. They are not coaching institutes. I will call them. I mean, they have their own empire. They have technology, teachers, lot of money. So if converting them into clients is kind of different thing. Our main focus area is small and medium-sized coaching institutes, which are completely non-tech savvy, do not have that tech infrastructure or technical know and how knowledge or kind of these how to run a coaching institute online. So they are kind of at the bottom of the pyramid. They have zero technical expertise. So convincing them of coming online, managing it online, teaching, study, material distribution, everything online. It's a bit of task. But yeah, once we onboard them, we give them some kind of training for a few hours or few days, and once they start using a system, they get to know that yeah, this is not that something which we which we cannot use, or it's something which a non-tech person cannot use. So once they start using the system, they are more apprehensive towards accepting the system.
Do they seek a lot of tech support?
Yes. I mean, initially, yes. For first few weeks, they ask a lot of questions. I mean, even clicking a simple button is something that they do not understand. So we have to do the kind of training for a few weeks, and once they start using the system, it's kind of easier for us to manage and for them as well.
Right. Now with COVID coming in, the experts said that edtech is going to be one of the industries which is going to really flourish. Has that been true in your startup case as well?
Yeah, I mean the acceptance towards the system, because it from I mean it's not an option as of now. It's a necessity, because if you are not online, you are nowhere. You have to teach online. So it has increased acceptance towards the uh, accepting a system, technology, etc. But at the same time, the payment system has been on a negative side. No one wants to invest heavy. I mean, जैसे हम लोगों का है बहुत सिंपल, अगर कोई 10,000 का भी एक सब्सक्रिप्शन परचेज करना है, सो अगर पहले कोई 10,000 दे रहा था तो अब सीधा बोलता है कि हम 6 या 7,000 दे सकते हैं. अगर कोई बड़ा कोचिंग है जो पहले 30-40,000 देने को तैयार था, अभी वो 20 या 25 आ गए. तो पेमेंट का थोड़ा डिफिकल्ट हो गया है, बट एट द पॉजिटिव साइड एक्सेप्टेंस हैज इंक्रीज्ड, एंड स्पेशली फ्रॉम स्टूडेंट साइड. आई मीन कोचिंग साइड को भी आना पड़ता है क्योंकि स्टूडेंट्स आर मोर accepting towards technology. So for that perspective, it has good.
What are the different sectors you target when you're choosing coaching institutes? So like coaching institutes teaching what kind of subjects, or so as you said, you target the mid-level, small-level coaching institutes. So what are they usually teaching?
Yeah, so it varies. I mean, from competitive exams to language coaching to simple 10th, 12th, and to primary classes. So we have a variety of coaching. But the majority of them are coming for competitive exams, because that is something which has continued over the period of this pandemic. This hasn't stopped. The elementary or the primary school or the schooling system from 6 to 10, they were halted for 2-3 months. But the competitive exams coaching, they didn't stop. So they were the primary focus. Apart from that, the language coaching institutes, those teach English or personal development, those have started to pick up. So these few are the some focus area. But apart from this, the system is not confined to any particular kind of coaching. It's generic for all.
Got it. So did you get a chance to read the NEP, which recently came out?
Sorry, could you please repeat?
Yeah. Really sorry. Maybe my net is not working out well enough.
That's fine.
So as I said, I was asking you, like, did you get a chance to read the NEP, National Education Policy, which recently came out?
Yes, I went through it. It's good. I mean, for us, it's good because the technology is has started to come into the education system from the government perspective. So if it's coming from government, then more schools, more coaching institutes, more teachers, parents, everyone will be more willing to accept technology, like the coding system which we government introduced, that the students from class 6 will be taught coding. So these kind of things will accelerate the technology adoption in the education sphere. So it's good for us. I guess it's good for all entire education system.
Right. So does it change anything in the approach that you have towards your business? Like when you read it, what did you think? Did you discuss with your team that okay, we need to change this? Maybe is there any change which you are driving, or is it supporting what you are already doing in every manner?
No, I don't. It didn't make much difference to us. It's possibly impacted. I mean, more than product or business kind of thing. It's more of psychological uh, positiveness that this policy had introduced. So we didn't do anything special with this, but yeah, in longer run, this will be positively impacting the business.
Great. And what are your future plans considering that so much has changed in the past 5-6 months?
Yeah, so we are trying to penetrate into tier 2, tier 3 cities, because more than tier 1 cities, tier 2 and tier 3 coachings are willing to take the system and start going digital. Because uh, I will tell you stories. There are multiple abundance of teachers who are teaching, I mean, very good, I mean, excellent in their own physical boundaries. Like if someone is teaching in a library, which is a tier 2 or tier 3 city, he's a good teacher, but he do not have that much of reach, or he cannot create his own brand. So this is where we are trying to focus on. We are trying to provide the system to those who need it, and then create their own brand and compete in the online education. So for now, there are two sides of ed tech. At one side, there are Byju's and Vedantu with billions of dollars of valuation and abundance of money. And the other side, they are coaching small and medium-sized physical coaching institutes who are the real backbone of the education sphere of India. So at some point of clash. So this will be like at tech giants versus lakhs or hundreds or thousands of small teachers and coaching institutes. So if this happens, we want to be on the other side of the part, and we want to enable them with the technology so that they can compete in the market and create their own brand and take it to the next step.
Great. I think you are in real sense empowering the teachers of Bharat. So all the best to you for that. I hope you empower many more teachers across Bharat who can use your digital help and enable their teaching in a much better manner.
Sure, sir. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Rahul. Cheers. So now I'm putting Shreya Garg, our only lady in the panel, in the spotlight. So Shreya Garg, guys, is the CEO and co-founder of Content Ninja. Her focus area is B2B marketing, technical writing, and future of work. It's a marketplace for growth agencies and startups. So a book lover with dual degrees in finance, Shreya Garg started her first business at 12, published 2 books, first one at 16, and edited dozens for others. And she's also passionate about scaling businesses. Shreya is a co-founder and CEO at Content Ninja, a full-service B2B marketing communications agency for ambitious companies, which is recently acquired by Blue Vector. And before we start, I think I would want Shreya herself to introduce Content Ninja in her own words.
Sure. So Content Ninja is a B2B marketing agency. We started off as content creators, and we soon realized that it was a very competitive market when it came to content creation and content writing. And a lot of content creation was focused too much on the creation aspect and not enough on why we are creating whatever we are creating and how to market it. So a lot of brands today are recognizing that it is important to use content to drive traffic to their website, and it is a crucial element for their sales strategy. So what we try to focus more on is a more wholesome and inclusive inbound process on how to create whatever we are creating and how to drive further traffic to it. And lately, we're also looking at pivoting to a marketplace model. So, given COVID and given the future of work that is soon here, 9 to 5 jobs are kind of getting redundant in certain industries, especially in a creative industry like ours. So, what we've seen over and over again is that our best people don't want to work full time. Our best people are the best writers, best designers. They want to freelance. They want to be more. They want space basically, and companies like structure. So there's usually a direct there's a direct friction between these two. So we're trying to figure out a model where so if you've heard of Lambda School or Presto, they've basically taken engineers from tier 2 tier 3 schools, train them in advanced technologies and place them with US companies under an income sharing agreement model. And this has become very successful because it allows US businesses to hire at a fraction of the cost that they would hire in Silicon Valley or in other areas, and it also gives them access to better talent. And in India, obviously, it gives access to better job opportunities and more flexible opportunities as well. So we're trying to do something similar for the creative space. It has not been done so far in our industry to such a model. There are marketplaces like Upwork for finding freelancers, but not under a structured managed solution and an income sharing agreement. So that's what we're trying to do because we have a lot of experience in the US market and we have a lot of clients there. So that is the intended idea.
So is it operationally intensive because people coming in, going out, and I assume that there will be a lot of that with the flexibility that you are offering. So is it difficult to manage resources?
It is a service-based model, so obviously our only service is the people themselves. So it is intensive. The thing is that we have built over our 4-year journey, we have built processes that allow training to be very quick, and we have built criteria for shortlisting as well. So it allows us to quickly hire and quickly deploy and cuts our lead time by a lot. I've also seen that if people find something good, like especially for creative freelancers in India, opportunities are limited. There's often a social stigma with freelancing associated as well. So if they find something good, they tend to stick around, even compared to greener pastures or full-time jobs. Because with us, they get better money as compared to Indian equivalent, because obviously we're earning in USD, so we pass on that advantage to our teams. And for us, again, it has only been 3 months since we actually actively, aggressively pursued this, but so far it's not been so terrible in terms of hiring and training.
Great. Yeah, I think the processes that you have built generate a lot of curiosity because also, they say that people don't scale now, and you have managed to do that. So, what is your advice for anyone who would like to do the same, to scale a people-based service?
Yeah, honestly, it was very difficult for us to do that as well initially. I remember there was an instant when I was about 1.5 years into our journey, and about 50% of my team quit basically because we were working them too hard, and we had it was very hard, fast-paced environment, a lot of pressure. It's not for everybody. And you always struggle to hire as a small agency or as a small business because you don't have many big brand names, especially if you're bootstrapped, you don't have funding. You can't really offer above market salaries right off the bat. And especially for us, when you're working on cool tech products, it's easier to hire, right? Because you have either a cool social mission or you have a cool product or maybe AI in your name somewhere that sort of attracts the right talent. For a marketing agency or a service-based agency that's actually doing something that's kind of, in a way, not very, it's not as easy to sell. Like, obviously we do creative work, but there are a lot of agencies in India, and why would anybody who's really, really intelligent and smart work for us versus a Dentsu or any other large agency, right? So it gets difficult, especially when you're new to the market, you don't have a lot of success stories, or you don't have a lot of big brand clients. It is very difficult to attract the right talent. And it was a big problem in our scale for us to scale because we didn't have the right supply to eventually sell, right? I think what really helped was that we focused actively on people and culture. Like, initially my only focus was on sales and operations, right? Like, my concern was that how do I sell more and how do I deliver it on time? So to be honest, culture was not something that I actively thought about or actively prioritized or actively worked towards. I just thought it'll be a consequence. Like, we treated people fairly. We had good policies. We had unlimited leaves and, a cool office. So we thought that that's what culture is, right? And we automatically assumed that people will stick. But while we had some good parts, we also had really late hours because US businesses. Sometimes our team would have to work on Diwali and Holi. So there was a lot of pressure also. And I'm not an easy person to work for, I think. So there was also a lot of pressure from me. I think what really helped was, again, as I said, to like, for me to take a step back and really actively focus on culture and to make culture my first priority, right up there with sales, to be honest. And for me, at least, it was a novelty. I don't know if other founders or CEOs already knew that, but for me, it was a novelty. One thing we also did was that we started treating people as family. And there's a lot of conflictory advice because people say that don't treat your employees as family, they're not your family, or it's just a false expectation that you're setting up, or maybe it's just for a PR that you're saying that this is family. But it also sort of blurs lines and boundaries when you start treating them as family, and it can cause problems in the future. But then my mentor told me that if you don't go beyond the obvious, or if you don't go the extra mile for them, why would they want to go the extra mile for you? So for example, somebody in our team reached out to us for a loan on his salary, and he was a new employee. And usually in the past, we've been very firm that, sorry, we cannot do this, like it's not a part of our policy, and we didn't want to set up unreasonable expectations. Tomorrow everybody's coming to us for loans. Like, as a small business, you also do not have that funds to really make that happen for everybody. But then it was a good question. Like, if I'm not willing to be flexible for that person, and tomorrow if I want that person to work on a holiday or to work on a weekend, why would he do that, right? Then the relationship becomes very transactional. Like, I pay him for 8 hours and he'll work for 8 hours. So I think that's what really helped us, like just focusing on people. That was very, very transformative in our journey.
Right. I'm really sorry for going off topic. I see a pile of books on your right side. So do you read a lot also, and is it like technical content or unrelated to what you write?
I read a lot of fiction. I honestly believe, like, I started reading when I was in 4th, 5th grade, very actively, and I could barely speak English when I was in 3rd grade. I come from a very small village. Thankfully, my mom has always been an active reader. She was a Hindi professor, so she used to read me Hindi books, and she, for my 4th, 5th birthday, I got a Champak subscription. So I've always been into books, and I think they've really transformed my life. And I believe, like, words, I don't have words to explain what words mean to me, essentially.
Amazing. Also, regarding the acquisition from Blue Vector, how did that come up in your journey?
Sure. So I think at about 3.5, 4 years in, we reached a saturation point, or a plateau, not a saturation point, but we sort of felt like we had plateaued in our industry, or we were growing, but we had hit a plateau where we were not growing as fast as we wanted to. And 4 years into this, you also sort of feel a little that, you've hustled really hard for really long, and you want to take it a little easy and, maybe make a little bit more money. So I had been in touch with the CEO of Blue Vector for over 3 years. We had been friends since then, and for a long time, he'd expressed interest because we had a lot of synergies with them. It was a matter of working out the cost because they themselves are not a very old business either. They're bootstrapped as well. So with some angel investors. So we had an opportunity, and they were looking at, they wanted to scale faster, and they felt that acquiring an agency like ours, where we've worked together in the past, so there was already a relationship in the picture, and we also have a lot of access to US markets. So we are a HubSpot channel partner. About 90% of our clients are from the US. About 95% of our revenues from the US markets. So they wanted access to that because InCommon is actually a joint initiative, the Future of Work Resource Marketplace. So to sell that, they needed access to our markets, and thankfully it worked out in a very amicable, normal, like there was no drama, there was no hard negotiation. It was a very, very non-dramatic, anticlimactic, amicable discussion that sort of transformed into this.
And you came out retaining your brand value, which is a win-win.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of autonomy. One of my concerns was that would we retain our autonomy? We're entrepreneurs. We're not used to working as employees, and sometimes that can become difficult when suddenly I have to apply for leaves and they get rejected. Like I kept thinking like what would happen, but I think it was a very interesting experience, and we've obviously the legal rights to the brand are with Blue Vector, but we continue to operate under the aegis of Blue Vector as Content Ninja.
And what does Content Ninja look forward to in the future now?
So we are looking to scale the marketplace. Because of COVID, it has really helped us to sell it. Everybody's remote now. So initially there was a lot of hesitation that do we want to keep people remote? Do we want to hire remote resources? There's also a little stigma against Indians when it comes to English, because sometimes Americans are used to working with, like a lot of engineers from the South. So there's a lot of, again, sometimes a negative perception of a very strong accent or like not good enough English. So that was kind of difficult. Not that, I mean, in no way causing offense to anybody, but it's an unrealistic and irrational stigma. So, but because of COVID, it has become easier to sell that idea, given that their resources are also remote. So it does not matter whether they're working from somewhere in the US or somewhere in India. And our sort of credibility and our partnership with an international partner like international agency like HubSpot, as well as our current references in the market, speak a lot. So we are looking to scale the resource marketplace further and seeing if we can, maybe raise a seed round for that idea.
Great. I think it's great to know that you're using this as an opportunity, and the marketplace thing is coming up. So we really look forward to that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shreya, for your time.
Thanks for having me here, guys. Great initiative.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Aru Mangla, who is the founder of RY Energies. His focus area is sustainable energy and the Delhi air pollution problem. He makes crop residues used fuel. So with an experience of 4+ years in the renewable energy sector, Aru Mangla leads RY Energies, where he is responsible for operations, business development, and strategy formulation inter alia. He is a passionate management student who loves to learn and apply the management mantras and principles in daily life. So now we have Aru Mangla with us, who is again a very active member of the organizing committee of this as well. So first of all, thanks for that, and thanks for being here with us.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are perfectly. Yes, I was asking you, you're the co-founder of RY Energies. What does the RY stand for?
RY stands for Renew. So it is so we started as Renewable for You. So it just got shortened to Renew.
Nice.
So then it becomes, because Renew, there was a big solar company named Renew Power, whose spelling is RENEW. But when we used to call clients and say we are from Renew, so they used to misline with them. And so we didn't want to use their brand, which is quite big for our use. We thought that there's some, like what we can say, a bad impression is going with the client. So we shortened it to RY Energies so that we can differentiate from them and not get confused. The client also doesn't get confused.
Right. And guys, really sorry if there is any technical issue coming in from our end. This will continue for a while. So yeah, we'll just persist, and whenever it's inaudible, so you just let us know in the chat, and we'll change some of our equipment which we are using. So Aru, also you are a business management graduate, and I'm curious about how did you get to understand and read up and build your expertise in the sector of sustainable energy?
So I had to read it from scratch. I could not anything any other thing about it because before this biomass supply thing which we started, which I will talk later about. So before that we worked on the solar energy solutions. We are still working on it, but we started with solar energy solutions first. So because I was not an engineer, I was from management background. So I had forget everything which we learned in 9th, 10th about power, energy. So I had to take out there's an ePathshala app by NCERT. So I took it up, downloaded the 8th, 9th book, understood the power, energy, what the concepts are. And in that manner, I started building my knowledge. And of course, the industry knowledge I got by working with players, with the customers, and understanding with the supplier that what all is happening. Hello.
Yeah. So yeah, I can hear you. I'm really sorry it went on mute. So my home is just in front of the road. So, you'll periodically keep hearing bikes and all passing. I'm really sorry if there's any background noise disturbing you guys. So yeah, that's why I muted myself basically. So I also wanted to ask you that once you read up about this, so this almost seems pretty similar because I read this autobiography of Elon Musk by Ashley Vance. And he also, when he stepped into SpaceX, he also read up all the things from scratch because he did not have any expertise in space tech initially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
The challenge would have been setting up the logistics because
there is a trait of a true learner, I think, and that's why I mentioned in the LinkedIn profile as well that I'm a true management student who is always trying to learn something. Like few days back only, I was thinking I think like some of you may have noticed my mail regarding I want to be a product manager that I sent in the JY Google group because basically I am trying to build upon my tech skills. Being from a commerce background, management background, I am working on analysis, visual techniques, and all these coding skills now. But like it's very starting stage, but still I like to learn new things.
I think truly the spirit of a great learner. But also, once you learn the stuff up and now you had to, set up the logistics. So the processing, the supplying, how did you set all that up? Because this is like a very big challenge in India.
Yeah, so like when we begin this biomass work, so like how we started this, the logistic work came at like very later stage because first we had to understand what's the problem, like what causing this pollution problem. Because of course we like currently we have all been put behind mask, and this should not continue after COVID. And Delhi or NCR area should be free of pollution. So when I was in college with my co-founder, so we were studying the causes of pollution. So we got to know that okay, along with other reasons like there are vehicular emissions, a lot of industrial emissions, there is a crop residue burning problem as well. So we focused on that. We went onto field, talked with farmers, and talked with the industries which are trying to use this crop residue. Then we understood the supply chain thing is linking that how to bring this crop residue which is getting burned by farmers to the plants. Like there are bio CNG, or power plants are there which can use this crop residue. So the only the missing block in this industry was supply chain. So we worked on that part, that what are the machineries that can be used to compress this biomass and supply in a you can say efficient or cost effective manner to the end user, so that they can achieve their own cost goals as well.
Right. And which are the areas that you have worked with?
Areas as in geographical regions, are you asking?
Yeah, geographical regions.
Geographical regions. So, as you must be aware that this paddy straw burning or crop residue burning majorly exists in Punjab, Haryana, UP only. So we started with this, and also due to proximity, because we were residing in areas okay to work in focus in these areas, and also government and media is also focusing on focusing this area only. But yeah, so now we are planning to move to like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu regions like that, because there's a lot of cane there, and cane trash is also a major residue which gets burned in India, which does not have any alternative use for fodder or any other use for farmers.
So how easy is it to kind of onboard people for giving away their crop residue to you? Because like I know very little, but from what I know is that they also get some money by depositing it at government centers. So were you also paying them something?
No. Sadly, there is no such mechanism available to deposit it with government. That is for the main crop, like the paddy, the rice. The farmers can sell to government, but not their residue. We collect their residue, which is a waste for them, agricultural waste. So this gets burned by them, and they in fact are very willing to. We do not pay anything, and we do not charge anything. There are unorganized players who charge on farmers, because that's a problem for farmers. Otherwise, they will get penalized by the government, because now the Supreme Court is very strict on this thing. And also, if they don't like allow it to be used for ex-situ uses, they have to use that residue in situ. They have to manage it, because they cannot burn it. Otherwise, there are FIRs, so they have to spend 5,000 or 6,000 per acre of money to manage their crop residue. So we help them to save that money and get them rid of their waste for free of cost. So that's the model for farmers. So farmer gets benefit, and also the industry gets benefit, because they get low cost fuel.
Right. And what was it like, when the COVID pandemic struck, what were the challenges that you faced? Obviously the operations would have slowed down a bit.
Yeah. Like they completely not a bit, but they completely like got completely stopped, and we had to use the force majeure clause with our buyer to not be able to complete the supply. So as some of you might be aware that the cane harvesting season, sugarcane harvesting season in northern India region is generally from December to April. So till March we had been supplied like more than half of the order, and like last 1.5 months were very important to cover the the order size. So but we could not like operate because all the farming, like the main farming activities were only allowed at that time, or not any ancillary activities were allowed. So we had to stop, and we fell short of our revenue target due to that. But that happened, and now we are trying to like recover from it. And the coming paddy stock season, like all of you know, like you have been living in Delhi NCR for so long. So the September, October, the November time is very like you know that Delhi becomes gas chamber. So our focus is now on to collect as much as possible, like collect as the maximum amount of crop residue that is possible, and not let it burn this time.
Right. So Arun, now that you're looking for a product management profile, does that mean your involvement with ROI Energies is stopping, or are you willing to continue but on a lesser time investment basis?
That product management thing was for ROI only. That like we were trying to focus on some software solution as well for our clients to look after the biomass quality and everything. So I was just thinking that to lead the tech team and the data team, so I should be having such product management skill, because we could not afford at an early stage to have an external product manager. So that was the reason of nailing that thing. And also like there are some like times when we used to when we have to pivot, or when we have to like look for other things as well to maintain financial. So I'm like the ROI is going to continue, but I just said that my involvement might get reduced for some time.
Got it. And managing so many roles might become difficult. So how are you planning to do that?
Managing so many?
The roles might become a bit difficult.
No, I enjoy it. Like I never find any difficulty, though there are some time issues that when I I think I often say this to my friends and my family that I should have a 48-hour day, but for only the time difficulty I face, like rest of the part I enjoy, because I'm a workaholic, so I don't feel any such pressure on that regard.
Great. And Aru, what are your future plans with ROI Energies?
So as I said, we are planning to expand into different biomasses and different geographies with collaborations in those specific geographies, like collaboration. So here also, like I would like to add, if there is any person who is interested to work in this sector, can let me know, and we can look for collaboration. And also this on the expansion part, yeah, this is only just one related thing, that how can we contribute as individuals. So there are many paddy straw like products coming out of made out of crop residue. So we can prefer using those kind of products like bio-CNG, bioethanol. We can prefer with those, start with those fuels. And also we can use paper made of paddy straw or other crop residue to promote the use of crop residues on the individual level. We can like help the Delhi air pollution to get reduced.
Great. Thank you so much, Aru, for giving your time to us. I think it's on a great path of scaling. And guys, if anyone wants to tie up with Aru, just shoot us a message in the group or message Aru personally. I think he's up for some great work in the future. And thank you so much, Aru, for your time. We'll come back to you in the question answer round.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And finally, we have Irvan Malhotra under the spotlight, who, guys, by the way, introduced me to Jagriti Yatra in the first place. So I wouldn't have been here if Irvan I wouldn't have met Irvan. So he's a co-founder of Gift Fund Social Ventures, which is a social entrepreneurship and impact investing firm. He provides low-cost funds for South Asian social enterprises. Irvan Malhotra is an entrepreneur with a passion for education, social enterprise, SMEs, Kashmir, and Manchester United. He is the co-founder of Gift Fund, a Singapore/India-based non-profit that gives low-cost funds to social enterprises across South/Southeast Asia. He aims to bring financial solutions to SMEs and the social sector. So as a proud beneficiary of Gift Fund, it's great to be talking to you after such a long time. So how are you, everyone, and what's going on these days?
Superb, superb. Can't be any better. How are you?
I'm doing great. So
Superb, superb.
it's a pleasure to meet you
And
again.
it's how many I mean talks you have hosted in the last 3-4 months. It's been amazing. Congrats to you. That I think you completed 100 with in the first part
Yeah,
itself.
yeah. We completed 100 in the first series, and we had another series of 10.
Wow,
So
wow, wow. Super. Congrats for that. Yeah.
thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
So if so, I obviously know, but for the benefit of the other speakers, can you describe gift fund social ventures in a small bit?
So gift funds is basically first of all I think we started because of Jagriti Yatra. Me and my co-founder Edward, who's based out of Singapore, we met in Yatra and started talking about a problem which is there with the social enterprises. Edward was with Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh, and he had this idea of giving low-cost funding to social enterprises. As you know, and most of the people here are running a social enterprise will know that they don't have any access to funds, and even if they have access to funds, it's at the rate of 30, 35, 40% per annum. So gift funds is trying to solve this problem of missing middle, where we call it a pioneer gap or whatever. So we provide social enterprises with a very low cost funding over multiple rounds till the time they get money from a bank or an impact investor. So it's a working capital debt funding which we do. So currently we are based out of India and Singapore, and we work through incubators. Like we done funding for some of the Jagriti Yatra. It started with Jagriti Yatra, obviously. So we enterprises, and then we do it with AIC Bimtech, IIM Ahmedabad, Unlimited, which is the biggest social incubator in India. So we take our pipeline social enterprises from these big incubators in India, and depending upon our due diligence, we get them from funds over multiple rounds. So that plain simple model.
So since you said, and I know also that you met Edward on Jagriti Yatra. So So did you discuss a lot during the train journey, or did the discussion started happening afterwards? Like how did the partnership culminate?
So it was really interesting because I have been running my own investment banking for maybe 10 years now. And it was in 2014 in Kashmir when there were floods. I decided to move to this field in the non-profit or the philanthropy field because I realized there are other things to do in life apart from making money. So I was traveling a lot. I got into Jagriti Yatra. I traveled, and in the whole of Jagriti Yatra, Edward and me, we didn't even speak a single word. So it was nothing at all. This was this guy who was wearing lungi and dancing all over the place. So I thought he just come for fun to the yatra. But after the yatra, we started talking, and I realized how brilliant he is and how focused he is. And it was everything happened after the yatra. I mean, 3 to 4 months after the yatra, so he proposed this idea to me, and he told me to join and start something, and I obviously wanted, and because of my experience in this field, I thought it makes a lot of sense to do something like this, because where we are actually solving a problem.
Right. And when we think about funds, so fundraising is, according to me, and I think according to many people, very difficult skill. So you are providing funds to social ventures like us. Where do you raise funds, or how difficult it is to raise funds?
If COVID wouldn't have happened, I would have said it was easy, but I think things have really changed after COVID. For in India, I've put in my own money, and we have raised money from Singapore. It's really difficult because you have, especially for a non-profit world where we take donations and use them as a revolving fund, you need to have a long-term relationship that needs to be there. But yeah, especially in India, it's really difficult because it's a very small group of people who raise funds, and they have that relationship as Jagriti Yatra and Ashutosh would know. I was speaking to him a few days back also. So it's very difficult, and especially for us. And when you talk about, so we are a non-profit. So for us, is raising is a different ball game. For a social enterprise, raising debt from the market is even more difficult because most of the banks want
collateral or you go to impact investors, then they need to have a certain threshold in terms of how much they will disperse. You need to be a certain level to take that money, but to reach that money, but to reach that level, you need funds. So it's almost like a chicken and egg story. So it's really difficult, I would say, but you just have to hang in there, and you just need to see that about your business model and be very clear about what you want to do.
So the proud beneficiary of gift funds, again, I'll tell that. So basically, in the when this COVID thing struck, one of the first few mails that I received from the partners was from gift funds, and it was so they said that if you aren't able to pay funds right, it's difficult for everyone. So I'm pretty sure that, can you hear me?
Yeah, I just missed the some part, last part.
Sure. So basically, after COVID struck, one of the first mails I received from any of the partners was from you. Now, and you had said that if you want to defer the payment of the funds, back to us, then you can maybe do that for a while. And actually, I did that. So I paid back the funds, and I think very recently I paid back the whole installment. And before that, we had paid most of the fund by July. So it took me a good 2-3 months to kind of replenish the funds back again. So now it was difficult for all of us. So must have been difficult for you as well. What was the thought behind, helping startups survive in this time where you must have had to take a lot of difficulty upon yourself?
Yes. I'll tell you the business model which we pitched to our donors is that till 29th of Feb 2020 we had 100% payment track record. And then obviously COVID happened, and we decided that what is the main purpose of starting the fund? It was for helping these social enterprises. So enterprise like yours who's working in education, you realize that it's very difficult for them to pay because it is a business, right? So we made a conscious call, and in 3 months we didn't take money from any of our social enterprises. So that was the main call which I took, that we only start after July. That is where the repayment started, and currently we are at 70%. So this obviously is difficult for our pitch, because we always are telling our donors that we have 100%. So it's currently I think 60-65. So that's difficult, but you have to always remember that why you started. So the whole purpose of starting gift funds was to enable the social enterprises who are actually working on the ground. That's simple.
And this is a personal interest question also, and for all of us, when are you planning to dispatch the next set of funds?
So we are looking as soon as we reach 75 to 80%, and most probably we'll start from September. But mostly September we are only doing it for the social enterprises who are with difference for some time now. So I think for other organizations, I think we should start from November or December, because we raised funds recently again in May. So that would help. But I think that should happen by after Diwali maybe. But for our social enterprises, we're starting from September. Hello.
Yeah, really sorry. It took me a while to get unmuted. So I was asking you that for social enterprises, when we say social enterprises, and till now, I think, what I have seen is mostly companies like us, which are, in the tech industry or in the kind of, scalable impact industry are there on board. Do you also plan on including a lot more SMEs into your platform, or do you think that's something for later?
No, but we will not go there, because in investment banking, I was already doing that. So I don't want to. So it's pure non-profit, where we want to help just the social enterprises, as simple as that.
Yeah, and I think there are some great interesting questions in the chat. So this one I would want to pick, and even later on also we'll have a question and answer session. But this is a very good question. What is the due diligence process at gift funds? Because I've gone through that, and it's fairly very easy to go through. So is that something by design that you thought that, okay, it should be easy, or did you think?
Yeah, so the whole idea was that the enterprises where we come in are really small in terms of revenue and size, And most of the impact investors, the banking sector you look at, they ask a lot of documents. So we made a due diligence process which is tailor-made to these social enterprises. So because of my experience in the investment banking, especially in the debt field, we've really designed it. It's very small. It's very quick, as you will know that if we get okay, the funds are dispersed in 3 to 4 days itself. So that's how it works. It's tailor-made completely to the social enterprise sector, I would say. Because if you look at all the documents and the ratios and the CMAs and all that stuff, we will never be able to disperse any funds, to be very honest with you.
So how many social enterprises do you have on your platform as of now?
I think it's close to 27, 28. We just started last year. Last year, February, we got our ATG and 12 base. So I think it's close to 27. And with rounds of funding around 45 or something. The thing is that we're not dispersed anything after February. Yeah. So nothing happened in the last 4-5 months in terms of disbursement. So, yeah, so that is where we are.
And with so many different types of enterprises on your board, from different industries, what's the kind of impact that you have driven and look forward to driving in the future coming months or years?
So the way we look at impact is for every dollar which we disperse, there is around $7 to $8 return on it. So that is where how we look at it. In fact, I think everybody is a better line in terms of speaking about impact. So we actually had a team coming from Oxford. They were supposed to come in March this year to do the complete impact evaluation of our social enterprise. Then obviously I would have been in a better picture, but Adver usually takes care of that. But it's usually just the revenue in terms of how much impact you make per dollar for the funds which we give to a social enterprise.
Right. And what is your kind of advice for anyone who wants to step in this sector? Because it's, right now it's facing a pretty tough time.
So which sector you're talking about? You're talking about a social enterprise, you're talking about impact investing?
I'm talking about impact investing.
There will always be challenges, but it's the thing that when I'll tell you, I'll just give you what's happening in the last 3 months. So I think that will give a better picture of. So we have this one product which where we just plain simple vanilla debt funding which we give to social enterprise. So the last 4 months we've been working on numerous products like social success notes, or you talk about a debt plus loan structure. And when you realize and look at these structures, you see that a country like UK has all these structures and India doesn't even have a 10% of these structures, where all the social enterprises basically are in India. So that's where the industry is. It's I think very nascent stage. There's so much to do. I mean, it's huge. It's huge, and there is so much opportunity to do things. Obviously, the model of every impact investor would be totally different, and that's what we are working on in terms of getting new products. So when I was doing this product, I realized that there's just so much scope to do. There is so many things to do in this industry. So yeah, I mean, if you ask me, for the next maybe 7-10 years, all the social enterprises are in India, and some of them, like Frontier Market is one of our clients, have raised like brilliant money recently, and some of them have done really good in the COVID period also. So in Maharashtra, in agri, have done really well. So there is scope. There is always be opportunity, I think, with the country of our size. I mean, and impact investing, there is huge scope currently.
Right. And now that we have struck that chord also, what about the social enterprises now? What do you think would be your advice to them?
I don't think I can give any advice or such. I just tell anyone, and I think I would have asked you also in the starting, why you start, and always remember why you start. So then it makes you should know the problem you're solving. So It's as simple as that. Because just because everyone is doing it, you have to do it. I mean, that's one thing in India that happens like often, right? So all the friends are doing it, so we also be a part of that herd community. But that's one thing I tell to everyone: always remember why you start. So and you start to solve a problem. बहुत प्रॉब्लम है इस देश में बहुत प्रॉब्लम है we saw with COVID with what happens with migrant workers and everything and you go to UP Bihar, you're working in Jammu, you know how the position of government schools are there. So anything you start, because the opportunity is there in all the field if you're really good at it and if you're really passionate about it. You might grow, you might not grow, that's a different thing altogether, but it's really important to know why you're doing what you're doing. That's simple as that.
I think that's pretty straightforward and a very nice advice for all of us. Thank you so much, Irwan, for your time.
Thank you.
And I think now we can move on to the question answer round. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So guys, now is the time for the question answer round. I have seen some great questions coming in chat and yeah, I was saving them up for now. So we have about 15 to 20 minutes for us to ask questions from any of the speakers that we want to. Please raise your hands if you want to ask a question. There's a raise hand feature somewhere in your Zoom panel. And yeah, once you do that, I'll quickly unmute you and maybe, you can ask a question by yourself. So I think Manohar ji is raising his hand. I'll just unmute him. So Manohar ji, you can unmute yourself. I'll send you a request. And guys, one more request. There should be one question per audience member just so that we can maintain a nice flow of questions. So Manohar ji, you can unmute yourself. I have sent you a request to unmute. Yeah.
Yeah, got it. My question is for, I don't remember, Mayank, right? So you said in the urban farm movement, can you describe like what kind of support you're giving to these people? Like, do you have any SOPs, like how they should plan their farming and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Providing all the kits
So
required for this, drip irrigation kits and all, this kind of support also providing.
So Aditya, can I answer?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for this, for urban farming, we have tried different models. So we also had, so if you have heard about a startup called Khetify, so it was working in Delhi in 2016 to 2018. So we started that startup also. So it was a kind of entire setup what we were doing, and we were providing kind of a khet in a box setup where we have 3 different customizations of thermocol boxes or bamboo or customized bamboo boxes, or they were about HDPE grow bags. What we were using, and then we were installing it using a non-soil medium having a mix of vermiculite, perlite, and this coco peat. And then we installed it with the drip system, and it has a customizable and optional IoT device for automatic irrigation, which is controlled by mobile. So that's what we were offering as one of our solutions for rooftops, for households. Apart from that, we also operated, but we weren't, unfortunately, we were not able to make it a sustainable option because there were a lot of issues with logistics, not with logistics, but also on understanding at clients or the people who were practicing agriculture, because it's the very first time that they are doing by their hand. So there were some technical issues while doing it, and it wasn't a viable option to have it as a full-fledged business model. But yes, we do right now have it as a we do offer them as a customized solution right now. So you can either offer thermocol boxes or HDPE grow kits or customized bamboo boxes based on your budget. And apart from that, we also do small consultancies for households who have some kind of a patch, a fallow land, or maybe a garden area, which needs to be for food gardens, specifically for food gardens. We help them in providing consultancy for the same. Otherwise, we work with schools and municipality schools or with NGOs and orphanages, and where we turn these areas into food gardens.
Thank you so much, Mayank, for your answer. I hope it answered your question, Manohar ji. So now I think Vihan is raising his hand, so I'll ask him to unmute and ask his question.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Vihan.
My question is from Shreya. I wanted to know, like, if she's following up income sharing, profit sharing model for her freelancers for the Content Ninja part. So I wanted to know the systems or the terms and conditions that you are putting up in front of the freelancers while hiring them, because currently we are somehow following the same method. We are hiring freelancers as a design partners for our startup, and we are sharing the profit based on their requirements. So they see or they visualize the work part कि उनको कितना काम करना है, and then they give us a code, and based on that code we provide a quotation, proper quotation to the customer and clients. So I wanted to know, like कभी-कभी हमारे सामने एक issues आते हैं कि कई बार customers हमसे NDA sign कराता है और वो डिफिकल्टीज होती हैं काफ़ी सारे डिज़ाइनर्स के साथ कि हम हर बार उनके साथ एक नया NDA साइन नहीं करवा सकते. So how you are dealing with that situation?
So I think, okay, it's a two-part question. There are a lot of, the agreement is structured in a way that there are a lot of standard clauses, such as confidentiality, non-disclosure, non-compete, etc. And I can connect offline, and I can actually maybe share the agreement with you and you can look at it. I think another thing is that in terms of like them signing separate NDAs, for us it's a little bit different because they typically get allocated to one project or one account, and it's usually a longer full-time engagement. So it's not like, okay, we're doing one or two creatives or we're doing a small project together. It's the engagement is longer and more structured. So we do not have that challenge as such. And I think it's also like, in a way that if people want to work with us, so there is a little trust also. And we have a very vetted community. So we don't usually work with just about anybody. And we have a very strict shortlisting process as well. And because we've been in this industry for 4 years, a lot of these folks are actually people in our own networks or like people we've worked with in the past on and off, or ex-employees, even or friends of ex-employees. So I think our challenge, we have not faced that challenge here, but I can still share our agreement with you if you want to take a look at it and see if that covers your bases. In India, legal enforceability is a little difficult, and honestly, like it's not possible. So for you to also enforce every contract, I think it's about setting the right expectation and culture from the get-go so that it does not come to that legal enforceability. That is just to cover your basis so that your client cannot question you or enforce it against you. But more than that, I think you have to go deeper than just beyond one agreement, and also speak to the freelancer and get them invested into why it's so important to maintain confidentiality, or what is at stake if that confidentiality is not maintained. So if they get kicked out of our platform and they lose access to better opportunities, that is basically the factor that keeps them to maintain confidentiality. So that is the more important conversation to have, or that is a more important system to build that is required.
Okay, and my second question was how do you ask them to work for a longer period of time? Like, do you have a contract of year basis, like 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year basis, or you hire them on basis of their choice? Like, वो जब तक काम करना चाहते हैं तब तक कर सकते हैं, and they can leave as per their choice.
So there is a notice period before leaving. There is a 45-day notice period before they can quit, and we signed a year-long contract in one go. Again, I think it's about paying them well enough that they want to stick around and they want to stay. So we've tried to make our system in a way that it is very difficult to find a better opportunity or a better, even if sometimes. So there are two parts to it. One is money, of course, and second is non-monetary compensation or non-monetary experiences. So while working with us, there are never any issues of payment. Even if our clients don't pay us on time, we pay our teams on time. So systems like these sort of, sometimes help build that trust that they don't want to work with anybody else, even if they're getting paid higher, or they don't even want to work directly with the client because they respect that there's an intermediary in between that helps them. That adds a layer of protection for them that benefits them in the long term.
I hope you got the answers to your question, Vehan. Thank you so much, Shreya, for answering. So guys, before we attend to the next set of questions, I'm just sharing a link to all of you in the chat. So this is a breakout room you want to attend form. It's a 1 minute to 2 minute form, maximum 2 minutes, which you can fill quickly while the questions are being answered, so that you can choose which breakout room to attend. So basically, we have added an event-like flavor to this, where after this whole discussion happens, you can actually talk in more detail with the speaker, almost one-on-one, or in a smaller group. So that's the feature that we have introduced, courtesy Pulkit's amazing suggestion. So guys, please fill out this form and choose the speaker that you want to attend the breakout room with. We'll create the breakout rooms after this question answer session accordingly. So yeah, I think Chetan had a few questions. Chetan, would you want to ask them yourself? I'll just unmute you. I sent you a request, Chetan, if you're there with us.
Yeah, hello. I had a question for Aru actually. That why mushrooms? I just wanted to know that.
Why mushrooms?
Yeah, why mushrooms?
So mushroom farming, like many people are doing, like we have supplied crop residue to them. So I didn't exactly understand your question. Like we ourselves don't do mushroom farming. Yeah, so I said that we ourselves don't do mushroom farming from crop residue. So what exactly is your question? I want to understand more in detail.
So it was me, Chetan, who wrote that in chat box. So basically, so stubble is used as a growing material for mushrooms, and right now we are, so Mayank decide, yeah, so we are right now preparing customized grow kits for urban areas, and so that's why I was just mentioning it to Aru that it may be an idea for collaboration for us to use that stubble if we can get it here as a
Yes, we have we already have few mushroom growers around Delhi, Sonipat, and in fact Himachal Pradesh who are doing this. So if you want, we can discuss on that. That's a very good opportunity for mushroom growers to use paddy straw. It is a very good substrate. But I have heard, because I don't know mushroom growing specific, but from my buyers I have heard this.
Great. I think there are collaborations already happening on this platform, so it's already working out well. Manohar Gupta ji asks one more question. Can you discuss more on the mushroom model so I can put this to both Aru and Mayank?
Yeah, I think I should hand over this to Mayank. He would be better able to tell about the mushroom growing thing.
Yeah, so it's a very broad question. So do you have any specific thing to ask in mushroom model, or how? Because we work right now in rural areas, so we do it as a community initiative where we work with around 700 farmers, and we do commercially button mushroom, and on a very small scale we do oyster mushroom right now, and to 100 bags per farmer per household. And then we make powder in oyster mushroom case, and then we have our dedicated hyperlocal market. We have ensured that, and they get their fair share of money for that. And for button mushroom, we offer them guaranteed buyback. We work in close association with NABARD for the same. So they are free to sell it themselves also. And this year we have also introduced canned mushroom. So that's how our model works right now. And right now we are in process of creating grow kits for urban households, where they can, instead of procuring these oyster mushrooms, they can procure these ready-to-use grow kits, and within 14 days they can harvest their own oyster mushroom at home. So that's what we are working with mushrooms. So if you have anything specific, maybe you can ask me with some pointed question. That would be helpful.
Sure. So I think Manohar ji, you can join Mayank in the room, that we are going to make very soon, and maybe we can have some follow-up questions there. So I think now the next question, Ishani requested me to unmute her mic, and I think she's already the co-host. So yeah, Ishani, please go ahead.
Thanks, Aditya. I just wanted to be sure that I'm allowed to speak. So that was why I asked you that question. I actually have a question for each of the speakers, but I will only ask one as per the format. So I'm going to ask a question which I think two speakers can answer. So this is for Pulkit, and maybe even Shreya could take a shot at it. In the content market, I think it's a very competitive market. In terms of a lot of people offering, and as you Shreya mentioned that there's much bigger players in space. So what are some of the process innovations, or something that sets you apart and gives you that niche where you have the competitive edge. So maybe if Pulkit could talk about edgy scribblers in that light, and if she also has some points. Yeah, thanks.
Sure. So Shri, would you like to go first?
I'm okay either way.
Cool.
So I'll go first.
Yeah.
So this was exactly the problem that we had when we started, where we were like, it's way too competitive to be profitable, or maybe you can be profitable, but it is very difficult to scale. The profitability is very low. One wrong client, one withheld payment, and suddenly you're unprofitable. So it was a very, very difficult challenge in the beginning for us when we started, and that's why we realized that we wanted to pivot away from content writing. We've added value additions in multiple ways. One is that we have a full service team. So we have designers, we have developers, we have strategists, we have marketers. So we went beyond content writing and tried to make it a little bit more comprehensive and add on bundled services that they find relevant. Second, we tied up with HubSpot, which is basically the go-to place to learn content marketing and content writing in the world. And they have built amazing marketing automation solutions that are used by most companies in the world. Every company that scales marketing beyond a certain point needs a marketing solution, and HubSpot is one of the top 3 or 4 solutions that they go to. They have great content, and they've developed strategies like inbound, etc., that are followed by marketers all over the world. So associating with HubSpot gave us a good edge because one, it added extra credibility. Second, it listed us on their HubSpot India partners page. And we became a gold partner. We tiered up quickly. So we are like number 4 on their partners page in India. So we get about 90% of our business from that. That was the second thing we did. Third thing we did was we decided that there's a lot of competition in the B2C space, so beauty, wellness, healthcare, fashion, lifestyle, travel. There are more than enough content creators in that space, and to compete with them was impossible, honestly. So we decided to focus exclusively on tech and B2B. So we believe in this concept called hyphen tech, where we say the world is becoming hyphen tech. So education is now ed hyphen tech, finance is now fin hyphen tech, and healthcare is now health tech. So it's the hyphen tech industry, or the world is becoming hyphen tech. And we focus only on hyphen tech companies, or we only work with hyphen tech companies, and that too typically B2B. So we work with Mindtree Technologies, we work with ITC Infotech, PwC, Amazon. All of these are technology companies of they have a very strong technology aspect, and mostly all of our writers are engineers or people who understand technology really well and are very enthusiastic about it. So you do find writers in travel and healthcare. You will not find writers in blockchain maybe or 5G as easily. So these 3 things have really helped us, and this took us 3 years to find that sweet spot between these 3. And I think now we're in a place where we say no more to clients than we say yes. So that has really helped us personally. And we are lucky that we figured it out in a way that allowed us to scale significantly faster.
Yeah. So even for us, I would really relate with what Shreya is saying, that even for us, it has been saying no more to clients now. So it took us around nearly 2-3 years, similar period of time, to even find our sweet spot in order to do really what we wanted to focus on the market. So USP for Edge Scribblers is that, yes, we are industry agnostic, and I can completely relate with what Shreya is saying, that finding writers in certain domains is really difficult. And that is where Edge Scribblers has built a network of freelancers in the overall years of execution we have been in the space. Secondly, we have also become very particular about the budgets in which we pick up our projects now, and the sort of services we provide. So we are in a manner a turnkey content development agency out there. So we have a partner. So let's say you're coming to us and you want a graphic designing service. So we have a graphic designing partner who will cater. But yes, we become your one-stop shop for providing all the services. So in terms of that is what Edge Scribblers has been focusing on. And yes, as we are moving forward, we are going much more specific to our niche. And soon enough, in another 6 months, we will be bringing much more changes.
Thank you so much, Pulkit and Shreya, for your answers. I hope, Ishani, you got it for your question. And now I think we have room for one last question before we do the breakout room bit. If anyone has a last question, would want to raise a hand. And I'll just check if. Okay, so I see Vihan's hand going up. Maybe he has another one. I'll just ask him to unmute.
I'm done with my question. I guess I just forgot to
It
turn
was the
off.
previous one, yeah.
Yeah, previous.
Got it.
So I guess
Thanks,
I
Rehan.
have a pending question.
Yes, Rahul. Yeah.
Yeah, so I got a question in chat box from Ishani. So the question is, what motivated you to move from the one-to-one client-based selling approach to a universal app for all tuition centers? Can you share the unique features of the app? Yes. So if you see the trend of the last few years or past decade, the technology adoption in educational institutions has majorly focused on schools. Small coaching centers and tuition centers haven't adapted technology because of 2-3 factors. The first is cost, the second of ease of system, and the third is how you sell the system to them. So for us, why we moved from one-to-one selling to a universal app. So for core of the product, we still have one product, one code base, but we create multiple applications from the same code base to and sell to the different coaching institute. So you can say the ad from our end, from the technology perspective, this is one system, one code. But when we sell to the tuition centers, we create their own white labeled application. So this because this preserves their brand. So we do not want to enforce class system on any particular coaching institute. We want them to create their own brand and propagate in their prospective markets. And second question is, can you share the unique features of the app? So I will share just one feature which is unique, which I feel is unique. So for like coaching and tuition centers who are into language coaching, so there isn't any audio-based questions, audio-based tests, audio-based assignments in majority of the system which are existing in the market. So we focused on kind of audio tests. So a teacher can create tests where questions are based on audio and the students can answer in the audio format. So this is one feature. Apart from that, there are many, like we are building an engine where the assignments and the tests will be generated unique automatically according to a student's personal strengths. Like if I am weak in algebra, the system will create a unique test for me that is for algebra. So these are a few features which are unique to us, and yeah.
I think Ishani has responded in the chat also, so I think she got the answer to her question. Thank you so much, Rahul.
Thank you.
And with this, I would want to thank every speaker for coming on this platform, giving us their time and teaching us so much about their own industry. I think personally for me, since I also got the privilege to ask the question, so I learned a lot. I hope all of you did as well. I just want to lay out a notification for the next Yatri Story event, which is going to happen in September. And the date is not fixed yet, but I think, that will be declared by Ishani in the group sometime. So thank you so much, guys, for sparing a holiday, that to your Independence Day, sharing your thoughts with us and exchanging insights. I hope all of you had a great time and looking forward to meet all of you in person and in another Yatri Story event in September. Thank you so much.